We are still talking about leadership in nuclear energy in the world. And for those of you just turning in, I am still Jennifer Gordon and still the director of the Atlantic Council's Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. Thank you. And I'm delighted to introduce this panel. The Honorable Catherine Huff, who is Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Energy at the Office of Nuclear Energy in the U.S. Department of Energy. The Honorable Kevin Hogan, MP, Shadow Minister for Trade and Tourism in the Parliament of Australia. And Maria Korsnick, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Nuclear Energy Industry. Dr. Huff, I would like to start with you. Please tell us a little bit about the Biden-Harris administration's priorities here at COP28.
Well, thanks for that. I think fundamentally when we talk about the Department of Energy, Biden-Harris administration priorities for my department, for my secretary, we're talking about things like highlighting our Earth shots, whether it's hydrogen or long-duration energy storage. We're talking about highlighting, ambitions with fusion. But in the context of nuclear energy, in my office, we really are excited about that Special Envoy Kerry announcement to triple nuclear power by 2050. This was mentioned in the last panel. I do want to clarify that a third is what we have today. 100% is what we need by 2050. So the intent here is it's 3 times nuclear from 2020 to 2050 is what's necessary. 22 plus countries signed up, 100-something companies. That is the big news. But under that, there are other priorities. We had an important announcement between us and the Sapporo 5, so Japan, France, the UK, and Canada and the United States collectively are responsible for a great deal of the conversion and enrichment capacity that's going to need to expand to displace untrustworthy sources of uranium. And so we committed to identifying billions of dollars, $4.2 billion from our governments in the next 3 years. We're in a real race to make sure that capacity is available, not just for the existing fleet, but for the build out that we need. The United States also, under the PACE activity with the UAE, announced a regional clean energy training center. We're seeing announcements from Lightbridge and Centrus. We're seeing announcements with, all kinds of companies that are here, whether it's TerraPower or others, and boosting the signal on things that keep existing reactors running, build new reactors, secure and sustain our fuel supply, and expand international cooperation. Those are the priorities when we look at new nuclear here in COP.
Dr. Huff, thank you so much. Minister Hogan, I think the thing that everybody thinks about on nuclear with Australia is the ban. So tell us a little bit about that, and how are you engaging to perhaps change that policy?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. I think, the first comment I would make is this is the 3rd COP I've been to in a row, and as was said in the panel before, nuclear has certainly arrived, which is wonderful to see. So when you say 3 times what you currently have as an aim, that would be 3 times nothing for us. So to give this a bit of a historical context, so in Australia we have, besides great reserves of uranium, we've had great reserves of quite high quality black coal, which is the cleanest coal you can get, but albeit a very dirty source of energy. So what our system has built around over many, many, many decades has been black coal. So we have 24 coal-fired power stations currently running, and they would generate on average about 70% of our energy needs right now. The other 30% being made up of renewables. So we, as the opposition, about 18 months ago, decided that we had to have the conversation, and we actually opened the conversations and said that we need to start to talk about nuclear as being part of the solution for us all to get to net zero. At the moment, the government, and I do make a partisan political comment here, if any of you run into anyone from the Australian government over the next few days, please talk to them about maybe they should look at having the discussion about nuclear, because at the moment they don't want to for reasons that they will articulate to you, but it has to be. Just to give you some context about what we would have to do if we don't use nuclear, the government is aiming for an 80% renewable target by 2030, so that's wind and solar. That would require, besides the unreliability arguments around that, that would require 28,000 kilometres of a new transmission system. And you're talking about, over $100 billion worth of infrastructure built there. But that's a historical context of where we're at.
Minister Hogan, thank you so much. Ms. Korsnick, I'd like to ask you a question about how we unlock the potential of nuclear, or unlock, or allow rather, nuclear to reach its full potential. And, you know, we've talked a lot about financing, and talked a lot especially about financing this week. And it seems that there are frameworks, whether it's Canada's green bonds or the EU's green taxonomy, that if nuclear were included, and nuclear, of course, is included in Canada, it allows it to unlock financing, green financing for nuclear energy. So talk to us a little bit about that, and how are you engaging at home in the United States on these issues?
Well, great. Thanks, Jennifer. Great to be here today. So as Jennifer said, we've had some pretty interesting encouragement through tax credits, whether those are investment tax credits or production tax credits. And I think that's great. It's a boost to all clean energy. I think the real challenge we have with nuclear right now is it's hard to be first. You know the first one is going to cost a little more. You know it's going to take a little bit longer. And so the challenge is all of the utilities need to promise to their ratepayers, I'm going to give you the cheapest electricity. Well, the first one's not going to be the cheapest. So the financing and some of the work that we're doing right now at the federal level as well as the state level is let's make it a little bit easier to go first. Because we know that once you go first, and then you go second, and then you go third, you're really coming down that cost curve. And it's not just in nuclear, it's in anything that you're going to produce again and again and again. The more you do it, the better you get at it. And so that's really what we need to do. We need to sort of get on with the build, but there's a lot of hesitancy right now. You want somebody else to go first so you can benefit from them going first and let you go second. And so it's a combination, I think, of government and private investments, taking a look at this and really understanding and appreciating the incredible value that's going to be unlocked. Hear the conversation here at COP. It's not just that we want to build in the United States. The whole world needs nuclear. And it's not just the nuclear that we know of today, and say what your grandfather's nuclear plant, you know, the large megawatt size nuclear. Yep, we're going to have some of that. But it's also the medium size and the small size. And in order for people to sort of appreciate how many parts of the solution that we can play in, they need to see it. And to see it, we got to build it. So we really need to encourage this sort of first of a kind and let's get moving.
Thank you so much, and especially for sharing the industry perspective. Dr. Huff, what do you see as the role of government in really encouraging these policies and helping nuclear unlock its full potential?
Yeah, you know, I think the government doesn't have the deep pockets that industry will always have, but we do have some small amounts of dollars that can incentivize those kinds of investments. We have a podium to provide a vision for what the goals need to be, and we have an interagency and national laboratories of scientists helping to inform how we design our energy systems. And so I think with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we have set forth some of that vision. We've put forth some of those resources, and we need to keep moving on that. Keep hearing from industry and finding out what they need. Keep driving forward research and development at the riskiest stages of technology deployment, you know, in the very early stages at a university where it's a risky, crazy idea, all the way up through, you know, testing in radiation facilities at our national laboratories, and then licensing through the NRC. We can support all of that through government incentives and support through cooperative agreements, through research and development grants. And that's the role of the government, to sort of take on some of those early stage risks. Sort of like Maria was saying, you know, it's hard to go first. It's also hard to develop technology from the ground up without partnership from, you know, the federal leadership. And so that's generally our role.
Dr. Huff, thank you so much. Minister Hogan, we've talked a lot about how the role of nuclear at this COP has just increased exponentially since previous COPs. Do you think that that provides a level of social license when you are back and talking with your government about lifting the ban on nuclear?
Look, I do, and I think what's interesting in the people I talk to, and you go around the community talking about nuclear, is young people are okay with nuclear. I think sort of my generation had an issue with nuclear. You talked, you know, we were always, in the Cold War, there was always a nuclear war. Well, you know, what was his name from The Simpsons? What's his name? Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, all that type of stuff. So, so there was sort of this perception that nuclear was bad, and the young people don't have that. Young people they're up with latest technology, they like latest technology, they don't have that fixation on nuclear that I think that older generations have, and they're good. They get because the other thing about this discussion, which I almost think has been it has been in Australia, at least I can say it confidently there, has been quite an immature conversation for 10 years. So the conversation for us has always been, how pro-renewables are you? And if you weren't 100% pro-renewables, you were almost a climate change denier, which was just so absurd, the way the values were placed on that. But look, I'm very optimistic. We're very proud that we've gone out as the first party in Australia to say, look, we need to look at the renewables, nuclear as an option. I think young people, when I talk to young people about it, they're okay with it, because what we are talking about is lower emissions. We're not talking about how pro or anti-renewables you are. We're talking about lower emissions and then at 2050 goals. So I'm very optimistic.
Thank you so much. And I think on the generational point, it's clear that my generation is the one that grew up with The Simpsons, and the younger generations really don't have that as a reference point. And so I think they're more...
I spoke about the Cold War, that's how I know.
Ms. Korsnick, I'd like to go to you. We just announced at this COP the industry pledge to triple nuclear, and we know that there's a lot of work that goes into pledges like that, and also, of course, the government pledge as well. Tell us a little bit about that process. What's this last year been like, trying to bring all these different stakeholders together and make sure that we have these deliverables here?
Thanks. It's been actually quite amazing. One thing that COP does, besides bring 70,000 people together, as you've seen over the last week or so, is that you plan for it. And to your point, in planning for COP, everybody wants to make an announcement. And so it actually becomes a coalescing force towards, well, what are you going to announce? What are you working on? What's your stretch goal? What can you say? And I think it's really been a wonderful opportunity. When we say this is the nuclear COP, it's not just from conversations and panels like we're having. You started off, I think day one was Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the IAEA, and he was announcing also a pledge. I think over 40 governments signed that, recognizing nuclear's value to climate change and climate mitigation. That was followed by the triple nuclear pledge, the net zero nuclear pledge, signed by over 20 countries. And then, as she mentioned, the companies signing on to their own net zero nuclear pledge, over 100 companies doing that. And also, it's not the end. So we're not here, we haven't achieved something by just coming to COP28. It's a milestone, right, on a journey. And already Rafael Grossi was announcing, well, what's the next thing? Well, they're framing out a heads of state meeting in Brussels in March, which he teed up, and it's to talk about nuclear. And so here again, nuclear is really, I think, rising to the value that it brings, which is all of this carbon-free, highly reliable, round-the-clock, uses the fewest critical minerals of all of the sources that are producing this clean energy, and in the fewest amount of space in terms of square footage, how much land that you're using. So there's just so much inherent value in what nuclear brings. And it also brings the pairing of nuclear with wind and solar and batteries, a lower system cost. And there have been studies that have shown if you do it all with renewables, or if you do it with nuclear plus renewables, the nuclear plus renewables scenario is the lowest system cost. And it has to do with the fact that when you add nuclear in there, you need less transmission because it's a more dense source. You're getting more megawatts in that area. And so I think all these conversations, panels like this, pledges that we just talked about, the head of state meeting that's coming up, I think it's just giving people a chance to sort of really understand and explore nuclear, and there's lots of good there.
Ms. Korsnick, thank you so much. And you mentioned that DG Grossi from the IAEA has already started to ask what's next. So I would like to ask each of you what's next and what do you hope to have achieved by COP29?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you pledge something like we need to triple nuclear power, you need to follow it up with really routine, quick milestones in the near term. And the milestones we need to hit are getting a rate of contracts for new builds immediately. We need a real order book that looks like a sufficient pathway that would, get to 3 times nuclear. So by the time we come back here, I hope to see that many utilities, dozens of utilities, have signed up for tens of contracts for dozens of builds. If we don't do that, then we're falling behind on the pledge we've just made. So the task for the coming year is to ensure that those contracts are being made, those purchases are being made, customers are making themselves ready to invest. But I also would say, what I'd like to see at COP29 is maybe a little bit more integration between nuclear. Yeah, it's a great nuclear COP, and we've seen a lot of attention on nuclear. I would love for us to be in conversations with others outside of this community, outside of the nuclear community. There is so much being done out here. It would be great to see everyone advocating, to see nuclear people on every clean financing panel, because I think it's really critical that we ensure that this opportunity is not a wasted one, to make sure that everyone's hearing this message and that we're hearing theirs and listening to what's important to communities that aren't yet reached by this notion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the first thing, the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy from Australia is at this COP, so I don't want to take his thunder, but I will here. Look, we have said that when we come to government, the Australian government did not sign that pledge this week, but we have said that if we come to government, we will sign that pledge. And obviously, when hopefully we form government quite soon, we would lift the prohibition that is currently on the nuclear industry.
Thank you.
Well, I'm saying construction permits and commitments to build. That's what we'll see by next COP.
Wonderful. Well, I think that was a quick and memorable note for us to end on. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists.